we are talking not just about Simian types, but a little bit about the Suwon and Sydney crease as well. So I shall get a slide here for you. If you've watched the previous videos, or if you have a Simian line, it is one single line straight across. Now, if you have no other lines horizontally, that is Simian type 1. Even if you have a little single transverse crease at the top and down the bottom, which are not really classed as a headline or heart line, just an odd floating line, that is still a Simian type 1. The lower line is acting like a partial headline, and the floating heart line is acting like a partial heart line. So once these lines are present, even with the Simian line, it just shows that the person has somewhat connected more to their emotions and to their practical mind. Next clip, Simian type 2. Simian type 2 is when there is the Simian, single transverse crease, as I've written, but there's a fusion of that proximal transverse crease. That's the proper scientific name. So the partial headline is actually connected to the Simian line, and there is sometimes also a floating partial heart line or a floating girdle of Venus. It depends how high it is. If it's slightly higher, that would be classed as a girdle of Venus. When it's lower, it's more like a combination of a floating heart line and girdle of Venus. Okay, so when there is actually connected, that shows that the person with the Simian line has got a good practical mind. They can apply themselves well in their mentally, and they have the ability to be creative as well. Their mental, it's reaching, the longer the line is, it's reaching down towards the moon, so it's showing more creativity. So if it's a longer line, that can also show that the person is somewhat creative. Okay, next, Simian type 3. That's when there seems to be a partial heart line that's fused to the Simian, but there often also is like a floating headline. But that shows that's like a branch, so it is pointing out that there is a connection to the person is connected emotionally well. They understand their emotions. So it is acting like a heart line in its place. And the floating sort of a headline is showing that there is good use of practical side of their thought as well. Now, Simian type 4 is when both of these lines, the distal and the proximal creases, are fused to the Simian line. That is, it looks like there is a heart line partially present, and it looks like there is a headline partially present. But when it's obvious that the line is still a Simian that goes right away across, usually these other partial lines are a little bit thinner, not as prominent. But that is showing that the person is able to understand their emotions more and understand their practical mind. And it slightly lessens the intensity of the Simian character, because the Simian character, if you've watched the other videos, it shows that the person is quite intense. They either full on or they full off. So they're kind of intense when they're off, and they're intense when they're on a high. So that hopefully explains some of these different lines for you. Now we're going to quickly talk about the Sydney crease. And the Sydney crease was named after the guy who discovered it years ago. And this is when there is a heart line present. It appears to be a perfectly normal heart line, but the headline is all the way across. Now, that can come up as one line, or it can be an extra ulnar crease which is fused to the headline from like the ulnar side. It fuses there to the headline. So it appears to be like a simian line. And that basically depicts someone who thinks a lot. They probably can't even sleep at night. Their mind just doesn't want to relax. So that might be a good sign for, say, a researcher or a scientist or somebody who applies their mentality in a good way. So the negative side to that is if the person is overthinking things in general, if they're thinking about negative things. So that is the Sydney line. And next, there is the Suwon crease, where it appears that the heart line is going right across, and there is still the headline present. So the headline is normal length, and the heart line goes all the way across, or that there is an extra radial crease which is fused to the heart line. So either as a one long line, or if there's a line fused, the meaning is quite similar. So this is where the emotions are very deep. So this is an intense person. They probably work very hard. They could be a workaholic and not necessarily a caring person. They may be a little bit selfish. I'm only saying that because I knew a lady with this mark, and she took care of her physical appearance a lot. She would not leave the house unless her hair and makeup was immaculate, and she worked hard. However, she was very fussy and particular in her choices in relationships, and she was a little bit difficult to get along with, so she couldn't keep those relationships. So if you have this very long heart line, just remember that you might come across a little bit too intense in certain ways to other people, and that they might not be able to understand your long emotional line. And I think that was the end of my slideshow. I will click this button and we'll see what happens.